Then let's start in earnest. So good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to what is the final session in our seminar series on mixed methods and mixed data. We started this series in December last year as we felt the need to get a better understanding of what it means to do mixed methods research and to work with mixed data sources. In the beginning, we intended to create a dialogue between different approaches. We wanted to understand what this type of research means in practice and what it demands from us as researchers. We wanted to know also what mixed methods means when it comes to causal complexity. And we desperately wanted to understand how one does it in reality and in the face of a difficult or complex reality, and how we can teach it to others and how one can be taught to do it. Looking at the whole series, which you can also look up on YouTube if you haven't, I believe we made good progress. The previous sessions did address many of these questions, and if you haven't been to all of our sessions, then please do what I did and check out on YouTube what is there. There's just a lot of in-depth discussion. One thing we did not discuss in depth so far concerns the question how one teaches mixed methods. And as many of the people in the seminar series already commented, it's pretty hard to master one method properly, let alone to work with mixed method designs and to work with different types of data. So this topic then is the topic of today, and I believe that's a very fitting conclusion to our series. I am absolutely delighted that we can welcome two distinguished speakers today, and from the University of Alberta in a very different time zone. Good morning, Cheryl. It's Cheryl Poth, who is the professor at the Department of Education, very experienced when it comes to research and complexity, especially when it comes to evaluation studies. She got first-hand experience of what it means to research something that is genuinely complex, that springs surprising results, and that defies easy solutions. And above all, she's the author of this excellent book, Innovations in Mixed Methods Research, which I will recommend you to read. We'll put it up also in the chat later on. The second speaker today is Judith Hodebom, who is professor for empirical pedagogy at the Institute for Educational Science at the University of Vienna in Austria. And like Cheryl, Judith has published extensively on the topic, and in particular when it comes to mixed methods vis-a-vis complex systems. Most of her current teaching program is about methodology in mixed methods, and what better place to find out what works and what doesn't in the classroom, right? So Sophia, Federica, and I were all very happy that you have agreed to give us some interesting thoughts. And the rules of the games today are very easy. We will invite each panelist to give a 5 to 7 minute statement regarding the main topic, and there will be some opportunity to ask for questions for clarification after each statement. And after that, we will open the floor for the group discussions. We have done this now more than 10 times, and it always works, so I'm pretty confident it will work again. And having said that, with that out of the way, I would like to invite Cheryl as the first speaker to do the kickoff, and then followed by Judith. Please, Cheryl.
Well, I'm just delighted to be here. And so thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm very open in terms of if there's a burning question that you want me to pause and address, I certainly can. I have a few minutes just prepared, and so I will always go off topic because that's just the way I work as things come up. But I'd like to talk today about the art and the messiness of teaching mixed methods, and about how bringing together different mediums, trying to contain the chaos, and creating something that addresses solutions to complex problems for society can occur through mixed methods. It's really nice to be here today. I'm coming to you from Edmonton in the Western Canadian province of Alberta. Spring has arrived here, where our days are longer and the trees are budding with a promise of warmer days to come soon. Our winter teaching term that begins the first week of January is wrapping up this week at the end of April. As luck would have it, I've just finished teaching a mixed methods course this term that has been on offer since 2011. It remains the only doctoral mixed methods course that is actually offered on my campus. It fills within the first 24 hours of registrations each year and draws across campus. My institution is considered a top 5 research-focused university in Canada with 35,000 full-time students. So we're also one of the largest, which might, some of the other schools that you might be more familiar with, the University of Toronto, McGill, and University of British Columbia. But it's interesting, we're situated at 53 degrees north, which is almost exactly where you're all sitting as well. But somehow we don't enjoy the same temperature, the same temperate winters as you. Our temperatures vary from -35 in the winter to +35 in the summer. But it's not surprising that I think your country might be even more interesting. But all of these things, these contextual factors are important, because the way that I have been seeing methodological thinking shift is important. I mean, COVID has had a huge impact on the way that people plan and assume things will remain stable. We've all been disrupted in different ways over these past few years, and I think it has really created quite an opportunity. I found this term in my class that some of the conversations were different than even what we've been having in the past. But to be clear, we haven't all figured it out yet. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. My initial training is in the biological and chemical sciences, and I studied to become a science high school teacher. As a science teacher, I traveled and lived around the world and was exposed to many ways of life and teaching. Something that struck me was how we measured and how we interpreted the extent of our learning in our students. My quantitative science background told me that, logically told me that the grade that is assigned is derived from the number of questions students got right. But in reality, things were much more complex. What if the teacher had not adequately prepared students for this exam? What if students were ill that day and that affected their grade and did not have the opportunity to demonstrate what they knew? I found myself explaining grades to students and parents with qualitative descriptions that I felt more fully explained or more completely explained, or just somehow better explained what they learned and what they needed to do next. Well, I did not know at the time, back in the late 1990s, but I was a budding mixed methods researcher who was finding her way back to graduate school to study measurement, assessment, and evaluation, which is what remains my topic area. It was during my doctoral program that I had the chance to fully immerse myself in the qualitative world and to dabble in the mixed methods world. And as complexity would describe, I could not have predicted how the influences at that time would affect my professional journey. My journey has not been straight, and I think that keeps it interesting. I like to remain, being able to be disrupted by lots of ideas. I have no doubt after this discussion today, I'll go around and go, how have these discussions affected the assumptions that I had about the way that mixed methods is being considered in different places? So I believe in, and I'm surrounded by a world today that generates and draws upon multiple ways of knowing and data every single day. It tells me that generations that follow are actually less inclined and perhaps even more open than ever before. We need to be harnessing these opportunities, and I believe it is our program structures and ourselves that continue to constrain our potential. I think about my passion in teaching our Introduction to Research Methods course for master's students, where I provide a more balanced perspective introducing the continuum of research approaches. How else can we expect folks to know what is available if they haven't had an introduction? I know this has not happened for every student, but I'm working to change this world. How else can we expect students to be able to match their research interests, what they're passionate about, with appropriate methods for actually addressing the questions? So that brings me to consider myself as under development as a mixed methods educator, and my approach is ever evolving. I teach mixed methods very differently now than I did 10 years ago. I am influenced by who is in my classes, their backgrounds, and I seek to disrupt them in ways that, makes them a little uncomfortable. And I actually tell them that at the beginning of the class. I also tell them if you get too close to the edge where you're having difficulty with the disruptions, then let's talk about that as well. But in a way, I hope that I'm welcoming them to a way of thinking differently about methodologies. I cannot tell you how many students have told me over the years that they have finally found a home through mixed methods, and not necessarily in mixed methods, but that they had these niggles and places where they were looking for something in methods that they were currently being maybe mentored towards that didn't quite fit what they actually wanted to do. So how does one teach mixed methods then? Oh goodness, I would have to say carefully. The teaching of mixed methods is complex. For the past decade, I've been studying what might evidence of impactful mixed methods learning experiences look like? And some of my early studies showed me that mixed methods can be a conduit for actually either becoming even more knowledgeable about both the benefits and limitations of maybe some quantitative ways, as well as maybe an introduction to how the possibilities that qualitative research works. I also am of the idea that at some point, we're going to move beyond the qual-quant thing. So this is where we're at right now. And a perfect example, in my opinion, is the way that we're collecting data or generating data in our society. Think about Twitter. Is Twitter really a qualitative data source just because it has words in it? Many qualitative researchers would disagree, because it doesn't actually have much of the contextual influence, which we think is so important. It just has words. So I think we have to think about those different ways of being. But for today, we'll talk a little bit about qual and con. So not surprising, perhaps I have found that it's most impactful when you have the chance to apply learning in supported practice, in the pursuit of something that you're passionate about. I think a lot about the roles that mixed methods research educators play, and I've come to think about them as coaches, listeners, and facilitators of safe environments for sharing perspectives and wonderings. And I hope that we're able to do that in this space as well. So some of the main hurdles and potentials, I think folks have to be ready to learn something new. I think creating an environment where folks can take risks is key. One of the potentials that I really see in mixed methods is that it's often an equal playing field, that no one brings massive expertise to it. And so in a workshop or in a course, people are just really trying to figure out, what is this thing? What is the literature? Where are we at right now? And as Judith and I have observed in the past decade or two, is the field is massive. It used to be much, so it's like we can give an introduction to, and I always talk about it, to the world according to Cheryl, and understand that there's lots of different ways to see the world of mixed methods, what you think is valuing what you do. So I go to great lengths in my classes to introduce diverse perspectives, to the best of my ability, the different ways disciplines and even regions of the world are approaching mixed methods, and some of the big contributions that people have been making, so that we can all learn from each other. And I think, when we talk about silos, they can happen in so many different ways. Can it be taught at all? Yes, but it all cannot be taught. There needs to be time to digest, to practice, and then to return to learning. Folks leave my classes and my workshops with perhaps the skills they need to design, but not necessarily the skills to conduct. And that's tough. And that's where I think actually we're at right now, is actually trying to provide more advanced training through different ways, like the Mixed Methods International Research Association, where folks have a chance to come back to a community, continue their learning, and actually keep pace with the rapid developments that are happening in the field. So just to finish up a couple of final moments, how to present the added value. I often get asked, how can I do this using mixed methods? Or if I can. and my answer is always, why can't you? Defend why you can't do it. And so to return to the hurdles, I think one of the challenges is that folks think that the designs have been discovered, where I think we're just at the precipice of opportunity in designs, in integration, and in valuing. I think it's going to be up to us as a community that actually put forward these different ideas. So why do mixed methods instead of learning one approach? Oh, in my world, I think it's for variety, for collaboration, for mixing of ideas. I have so many opportunities to work with interesting people who disrupt me, who move my thinking forward in ways that you can't always predict. And I think one of the challenges that the field has is that there's an assumption, and maybe that's moving on now. There used to be an assumption that if you knew qual, you knew quan, then you could do mixed. where I think we're beginning to better articulate, and it's something that I'm working on right now as well, is what are the distinguishing expertise that you need to develop that allows you to do high quality, credible, whatever we want to call mixed methods. And so, and then over the last couple of years, I've really been embedding in my classes more and more about the complexity of research in mixed methods. And I think by doing that, it actually helps folks to see the complexities in all research and the way that that sure, we have to have a plan, we have to have a design, but if you ask any researcher, have any of us had a plan that actually worked out exactly how we initially planned it? And I think it's really interesting that we almost sanitize the way that we describe and report research in general as being, and so why not give access to some of the thinking and some of the I don't really want to call them challenges, but even just the procedures or the adaptations that we kind of go through. So I think that there's a real opportunity here in even the conversations that you've been having here around how do we position ourselves for being able to adapt to the research conditions in which we find ourselves in. And maybe, and I think from there, mixed methods either becomes an option, or you decide that a different research methodology is actually the most appropriate way of going forward. I have a program of research that involves mixed methods, but I still do qualitative work in different places. I do qualitative work in different places, and I don't always do research methodologies that I'm the key expert. I will often work with others where we're all bringing something to the table, and I think that that's interesting. Even masters and dissertations, there's an assumption that you're doing it alone, and I know it feels like you're doing it alone sometimes, but really, you're really doing all of our research in a team to some degree. You always, and so I think if we think about research in that way, it will help us to maybe think about the ideas that we don't have to be the expert at absolutely everything, but that we have to be willing to learn. So I will stop us there and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That's wonderful, very inspiring indeed. There's an opportunity to ask for quick questions for clarification before we listen to what Judith has to say. Are there any questions for clarification at the moment? I would have one, but I'm waiting for others. Could you perhaps, Cheryl, one thing you said, you used the term disruption a lot, and I was wondering, to disrupt from what? What kind of disruption are you looking for?
Oh, that's a great question. I think each person has their own assumptions. And I think those assumptions about what is possible, how we see the world, the ways that are more rigorous, perhaps, in research, are all different for each one of us based on our training, based on our exposure, based on our discipline, based on, and so what the other word that I like to use is poking. And so I wasn't sure if that would be a word, where you, maybe that's the gentle nudge, and so I hope what happens is that it just moves us out of our comfort zone and about thinking more broadly. And so I think a disruption is a series of pokes in that way where we all have those moments of, we sometimes talk to them as like aha moments where something all comes together and you're like, oh, I can see why maybe that might be an issue. Or I think maybe that participant group might not be on the people I should be talking to. And maybe those kinds of moments. So thank you. I don't think I've ever really thought about that. So I appreciate that.
That's where the questions come from, right? Anitra, please.
Hi, Cheryl. I love your enthusiasm for teaching mixed methods, and as someone who's sort of just getting started with sort of teaching methods, not yet mixed methods, you mentioned that you changed your teaching approach and your tactics over the last 10 years. So could you elaborate a bit more on that? Like, how were you teaching mixed methods sort of 10 years ago, and like what changed, and like how do you teach it now, and sort of some practical yeah, tips also for people like me?
It is a brilliant question, and it's been really interesting. Oh gosh, I'm trying to. COVID helps me forget how many, what years it is, where things. I think it was one of our regional conferences. So forgive me, maybe you can help me. But in Vienna, in the conference, that was 2018, correct? Okay, and we started doing a couple of actually workshops on teaching in mixed methods, and I didn't think anybody would be super interested in it. And I was so surprised by how many folks are interested and how hard it is to get started. And part of the challenges is I'm a first generation mixed methods instructor. I didn't ever take a mixed methods course. Yes, I took a workshop, in 2003 from John Cresswell. That's where it all started. So it's really interesting to me to think about how I've changed over time. And maybe it's hard for me right now. I might still be processing in terms of how I'm doing it. But I think it's keeping pace with the diverse folks in my classes. And I think one of the things that I love is I probably have 15 different faculties in my classes. And what that means is I will often give 2 or 3, choose your own adventure. Here are 2 or 3 readings that about a topic, but it comes from maybe different disciplinary things. And I think what I do is I really try to bring together and give people opportunities to talk about what they're each taking away from a reading, and then building an understanding of different perspectives. I think I'm much more focused on maybe some of those softer skills that people are going to need in order to work in teams than I used to be. I think I'm much less directive in terms of here's what you need to know. I have people identify a learning priority for the course and then help them tailor their assignments in order to help them, work towards something that is of personal interest to them as well. And then I designed the instructional design piece around, so people then have to then share their learning with the class, and maybe even. So I think there's a bunch of, I think I'm much more, maybe this is a good connection I'm making for myself as I'm talking. I think I'm much more about, if I think about the complex adaptive systems, right? It's about how do we make explicit how we're changing ourselves in the class, and how do we each contribute to the learning that's happening there. And maybe just a little bit more of an explicit way. I'm much less about here's how we do this and here are the procedures to design. It's much more about what are the questions you need to be asking yourself in your design process. Great question, thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And I think this question will pop up a few more times in the conversation today, because all of us were looking for silver bullets. So neither you nor Judith could get away with, I don't know. we want silver bullets. Thank you so much, Cheryl. That's delightful. Judith, may I ask you to give your 5 to 7 minute statement?
Oh, yeah. You can always ask.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay. I assume that you all noted that I noticed that I put two documents in the chat, and I will also share my screen, and the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Host, please, could you enable that?
Yes, okay. Okay, so now you don't see my screen, is that correct?
Yes, we can see it now.
Do you see my screen? Okay, okay, that's great. I just wanted to give an example of what I kind of say mixed methods, so to speak, for beginners. In my class with bachelor students, I often have them analyze existing mixed methods publications, and I would like to explain why I do this and why I think that that's a good way to to get acquainted with mixed methods research. And at the same time, I think it is also, it's doing something important and is bringing a new perspective. In mixed method research, we have a kind of paradox. So what you do in mixed method research is that you bring inferences from both qualitative and quantitative research together into one large inference, which is then also called the meta-inference. And this meta-inference is considered very important in mixed method research. And it's even the case that, for example, Tetley and Tesha Corey said that the quality of the entire research project depends on the degree to which integration, blending, or linking of qual and quant inferences is achieved. However, if you look at how mixed method scholars speak about performing mixed method research, then often the focus is not so much on integrating inferences, but is on integrating methods. So, for example, Maxwell says he discusses how to integrate qualitative and quantitative methods and data. And so the mixed method scholars are not speaking about integrating inferences. And interestingly, there's one exception, which is Nancy Cartwright, who also gave our keynote speech in Vienna 2018. So it's almost like a division of work between the mixed method scholars who are mixing the methods and the philosophers who are mixing the claims. So to solve this contradiction, I teach my students how to separate methods and inferences. And I teach them that, in my opinion, it's the inferences or claims that are integrated and not so much the methods. So one common assignment in my teaching involves asking students to analyze how the claims and meta-inferences develop in one published study and through the use of which methods. So here I have an example. A study and randomized control trial in Kenya, where it was found that providing textbook to primary school children did not have an effect on their school, on their test scores. And then researchers went to the school and asked children with a median score to read out aloud their textbook, and then they discovered that most children were unable to read their textbook, which was in English. After that, they reanalyzed our quantitative data about test scores and discovered, okay, those students who already had a very high score, for those students, providing textbooks compared to a situation where there are no textbooks has an effect. Now, what I ask the students is to analyze and to put their analysis in a table which looks a bit like this. So if we look at it, what I do is, what I ask them is to show how this meta-inference, which we can see at the end here, develops. And so, for example, here we start with two claims. One claim providing textbooks raises average test scores in primary schools, which is a claim from previous research. And then their first quantitative methods, which showed providing textbooks does not raise average test scores for children in primary schools in rural Kenya, which is done with quantitative methods. We can integrate these two claims, and then we have a contradiction. So then it's first of all important that they realize that we already started this study with a contradiction. Then there is a second one which says, okay, most children couldn't read their textbook, and they couldn't read it because it's written in English. What we also, what they also did then is that they said, okay, we will now split into two groups. One group, the textbook did increase scores for students with high pretest scores. It did not increase scores of students with intermediate pretest scores. So again, we have a kind of a contradiction, but we still build further. And here, for the first time, we have a kind of mixed methods integration, because now it says, okay, looking at the quantitative subgroup analysis, we can see textbook did not increase the scores of students with intermediate or low pretest scores, and the observations, which is qualitative, said most children could not read their textbook. So then we have an integrated claim. Textbooks did not have an effect for most children because they could not read their textbook, because they were written in English, which is not their native language. And then reasoning that most likely those children who had high scores already, for those children, it had an effect because they could read their textbooks, then in the end led to a meta inference. So I think this, I really love this assignment because it does a couple of things. First, it separates methods from claims. It makes clear that it's not the methods that are mixed, but it's or integrated, but it's the claims that are integrated. And it shows that within one mixed method study, you have several integration points, and most, in this case, most integration points are not mixed methods. And that makes them also aware, okay, there's much of different types of integration going on in a mixed method study, not only mixed methods, but also mono method or with previous research. And in addition, they also become then aware that this type of integration may also happen, not in mixed method research, but in, say, multiple method research with two qualitative methods, or even in mono method research. So that was what I would like to show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. It's very much appreciated. And I would like to ask people if there's if there are any quick questions before we get into the group discussion. Federica, please.
Yeah.
Thanks, Judith. That was very interesting. My quick question is, I really loved your, I mean, what the outcome of this analysis is, but do you also have other categories other than contradiction and explanation of what happens with these claims and methods? What are the categories that you use?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, basically, I must say I do not really use the categories before. I just look what is happening, but actually many of them are contradiction, explanation, but there's also juxtaposition. But I don't think that there are many different connections, and that in itself, I think it's interesting because it shows that this whole pattern of contradiction explanation is also very basic for mixed methods research, which also in that sense abduction is basic, which has also been remarked in the literature. One final comment perhaps, which also brings us back to the last session, in which, for example, Lisa Lott also said, no, you have these two views, and these two views cannot be brought together. Well, I think in my example, they can be brought together, but it's also important that a mixed method study may also lead to a contradiction. So it's not necessary that the contradiction is really solved. As for example, I don't know whether you know that book by Anne-Marie Moll, who showed that there are several perspectives on atherosclerosis, and they cannot be combined. And so they can be combined outside this research, for example, in medical practice. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judith. Irene, please.
Thank you, Judith. Really interesting. Actually, the first paper you mentioned, I have used it a lot myself and found it very useful. I wanted to ask, what kind of students did you use this exercise for? I mean, is it probably because I'm not from UVA, I don't know the context, I guess. is it for students that study interdisciplinary studies, or is it for a master course? Like what level of previous experience?
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for that question. This is something I do with bachelor students who study education science. And it's a course that they can take after they have had their first introduction in design, research design, qualitative and quantitative and mixed methods. So yes, it's basically it's a bachelor student in their third semester, more or less.
Thank you.
And it's not easy. I can tell you, it's difficult for them, but they manage. I mean, I had a group last semester where 25 students, and there were 2 who really didn't understand it and then didn't pass, but the rest they managed. And the interesting thing was that those students who were unable to manage, they really had the idea that it was a kind of a linguistic exercise with the text, and no, it wasn't. So they started really to put in sentences literally from the text instead of trying to find out what the logic and the development of the claims was in the study.
I'm still impressed that they managed to pull that off. It's quite something, yeah. Thank you so much. We open the floor for the broader discussion. So questions that could be asked or experiences that could be shared. We're open for that. I've got a ton, but I'll wait for others first before I start doing more talking. We lost you for a second, Federica. Could you try again?
Yeah, thanks. The whole window froze and I thought, oh, my internet is down, but then everything was back, so I should be back.
It was an experiment.
I hope not with me today. There are 2 aspects from the 2 presentations that I would like to pick for further reflection. One is something that Cheryl said about why doing mixed methods and to have more diversity. And I find it very interesting to put it up front that the more diverse our methods and perspectives are, the better for the kind of knowledge that we can gain and produce. This has, I think, a lot of support from some parts of philosophy, but also from kind of demystifying this idea that there is the solo genius that will know it all, etc. And so we have kind of to go towards a more collaborative ways of doing research, etc. So that is something that I really appreciated. The second is that the exercise that Judith is doing with the student kind of triggers me as a philosopher of science and methodologist, because it really means to me that when you try to understand whether a study has some kind of validity, you really have to look at all these elements that are to be found in the published paper and that cannot be reduced or condensed in any possible way with magic numbers like, certain thresholds summarized in, p-values or stuff like that. And the problem is not that they are not translatable in a qualitative setting. The point is exactly what you are trying to do with the exercise, Judith. So what it is that you are inferring using which methods, and what else do you infer if you use another method, and therefore what kind of relation is there between these methods? So to me, it really calls for a different conceptualization of validity. But that is kind of in the to-do list to be developed. So thank you both a lot for prompting such reflections, at least from me.
Cheryl, Judith, who would like to respond to this, or Would you or just confirm that Federica's completely right?
Cheryl, please go ahead.
Sure, and oh, I'd love to talk more about the construct of validity at some point, because I agree with you. But if I can, one of the things that raises Judith's discussion raises for me is I think another aspect of my shifting of teaching has been I centralize on integration, about the why, and why do you need to integrate? How are you integrating? Where are you integrating? And what are you getting from the integration that you couldn't have gotten? And so in the same way that Judith gives us this wonderful example about how she goes about that in existing data, just having those kinds of conversations and always coming back to that central point. Integration was a key part of my teaching at the beginning, but wasn't as central as what it is now. I think, so I think that's just an interesting observation as to how I think the field of mixed methods has gotten more explicit about its valuing as well.
Okay. Yes, I also would like to add two remarks about validity. The one is that if you also not only include your methods, but also, for example, your sample, and then reflect on the two different claims and how you combine them, that also makes students, I think, very much aware about validity and possible validity issues. Because if you, for example, in your quantitative study, give a complete overview of, say, differences in admission rates among specific groups in the whole country, and then you do interviews with 8 people and then say, okay, we have these differences in admission rates because people do not have access to the same educational opportunity when they're young, for example. And then you say, okay, I have this whole country there, and there I have these 8 people. So that also triggers you to reflect on the validity of what you're doing. And the second thing is that, to me, okay, always I think questions for further research are important, but I would say now I would say that validity to me means the extent to which the authors have further developed their claims. So not so much whether how robust the end result is, but how to what extent did they further develop their claims given the type of research that they did. So if your study leads to an interesting question, an interesting hypothesis without testing it, that's perfect. So, for example, what these authors of this article did well is that they performed that subgroup analysis and then discovered these differences between, say, students with very high pre-test test scores and the other students. And if they had not done that, I would say, well, that's not a real mixed methods study that really makes the most out of their data. So that, to me, is a very important aspect of validity.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
If I can, I'll just add one thing on
please.
sampling. I don't think we've talked enough about sampling in mixed methods, at all. And I always say, what is the relationship between your data sources? And as long as we're explicit about that, I mean, that really helps us to be able to couch, the extent to which, we can generate, the implications for your findings as well. So just to kind of concur with Judith, that talking about sampling is a really important aspect.
Yes, most certainly. Yes, thank you. Anitra, please.
Yeah, so again, Judith, it was a fascinating example and sort of got me thinking about sort of like if I had to use the same example like in a class that I taught. And one of the things that I'm sort of struggling with is sort of there's this tendency to also simplify, and I think the inference that students would get is that, okay, like only qual or only quant is not going to work, and you must combine to get sort of the best result, right? And I guess we all agree that that's not the message we want to be giving to. I think there's also some level of pragmatism that different research questions and different contexts and require different things. Sometimes you just need sort of further, but just different qualitative methods to back what you have, or just sort of elaborate or use a different quant method itself. And so I know that there's a tendency that sort of we want to simplify and sort of promote that, okay, mixed methods, but like, how do you do it in a way that doesn't take away from the realities that, you don't always have to just combine quant and qual, or, so yeah, I'm just sort of worried that are we setting ourselves for a trap here by trying to teach in this particular way.
Thanks. Yeah, please, Judith, go ahead, please.
Well, my first reaction would be, if you look at my paper, so the PDF, you will also find, I think, at least one or perhaps two examples where qualitative and quantitative are not combined, and where you have the same process of developing your claims and then have a comprehensive inference at the end. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's also, in a sense, my message to my students, kind of, so to speak, demystifying mixed methods research by saying, yes, you have a lot of the same processes going on in quantitative and qualitative research as well. And that also then makes it, enables you to talk in more depth with your students about what are the advances then of combining the two. So, for example, that you have a quantitative to have an overview of the whole thing, and you have a qualitative to find out more about processes, for example. Yep.
And about you, Cheryl?
We'll leave it there. That was great.
Okay, thank you so much. In the meantime, there's been a question in the chat from Irini, and who asks if there's a good paper for sampling frameworks that you could use in courses. So if you have any ideas, please add them to the chat. It's always interesting at this point in the seminar series that there's a separate parallel discussion in the chat going on while we're having the group discussions. I really love that. I would have a question to both of you, namely, the thing that I often struggle when teaching methods is that I find it pretty hard to get people to do one method properly, let alone that they can see how different things can be combined, and also have the skill to do it. And I would like to ask both Cheryl and Judith, how do you deal with that? How do you get students to that point that they can do this in a meaningful way, and not just to put all the ideas in the grab bag and hope that something comes out?
I've also started to, it's a great question. I've started to actually give some guiding questions that you need to be thinking about in different places. And I actually use as a bit of a structure, and that's the kind of ending. I no longer ask students to do again, and maybe another change, a method section, or I actually want them to be more like, less is more, because the other challenge is students are coming in at all different places in their own research process. And so I sometimes have students at the beginning of the programs, mid, or in the middle of writing. So there's an equity piece about what we're actually assessing in my class. And I want to assess the thinking about integration, about the why, the how, and the really nitty gritty. So I think I've gotten much more focused on the nuances, and that they have to tell me what their decision is at that moment in time, and then the why. And so I think being very focused, it has helped me to get at how far they've come in those actually what looks like really simple questions, but are actually quite complicated. And 2 weeks before the end of class, I actually have them throughout the class, we have discussion times during the class so they can talk with different people about where they're at. And then we actually have a time where they actually present their ideas in a very short time frame, like in kind of 10-minute kind of discussion, where other people can say, well, where they contribute to each other's ideas. And again, what I think that models is what we hope students are doing outside. And getting that idea that I don't have to think about my research by myself, and and my supervisor isn't the only person I can talk to about my research. So those are the kinds of maybe practices and skills that I'm trying to get at in that teaching. And then as we talk in the group, then other people get a sense of what other people are struggling with. And it becomes a really nice, and then I'm able to contribute a little bit to, here's where I think you're struggling with. And then other people then also get access to those conversations. And that's one of the reasons why I've moved away from using individual email to using discussion boards in my classes. And what people tell me is that even reading my responses is helpful for them. And then as an instructor, it's much more efficient for me because then other people, and sometimes I'm even like, oh, have you seen the discussion thread here? And so just kind of bringing those, a community of practice or a community of learning, into the class as well.
And as if I get it correctly from you, they learn through experience. It's experiential learning. Right, I see. Thank you. And how about you, Judith?
Yeah, well, I think I can say two things. The first is that in their third semester they have a research design, and I also teach that, and which is in itself, you could say, meaningful, because you are talking about not so much the methodological technical things, but about the concepts. But I teach quantitative introduction, quantitative research, and do that in a meaningful way, in the sense that we start with factor analysis, or we start with questionnaires, and that you have constructs that you want to measure. And then I make clear that you can have ideas about what about the questions, whether they belong together or not. And then I have them fill out such a questionnaire. And then we go to the factor analysis. And what they see then is that a factor analysis just provides a kind of a correction to the ideas that you had about whether these constructs were, these questions were measuring the same construct. And that's great. And for example, one exercise is that you simply take the questions of one construct and the questions of another construct, and then you should expect, okay, you have one factor here and one factor here, and that's then not what happens. And you can then reflect on that and see, oh, yes, I intended that question in that way, but most likely the participant understood it in a different way. And that's what I really like about teaching, trying to teach also quantitative methods in a meaningful way.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a very elegant way of doing it. Very nice. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. Are there any other questions? I have follow-up questions, so I'll just go ahead with another question. Oh, Sophia, you go first.
Yeah, no, I don't really have a question, but maybe a remark, because I mean, then have we got it wrong with even with the name mixed methods if we don't mix anything? So do we have to maybe strive to change this term into mixed logic social research? I don't know, because both of you, I mean, when Cheryl was talking about the disruptions and the changing and the challenging of our own assumptions, and Judith presented the different ways for which we can combine the different logics to explain our data. Yeah, it really clicked in my head and said, yeah, of course, it's a matter of logic. So I don't know, shall we establish a new community on mixed logic research?
Well, I have thought about this a lot. It's not about the methods, and I think the problem with the word mixed methods is that people assume that that's the only place where we can mix. I think there's so much baggage associated with it, and it's super interesting that you mentioned that. Judith and I are actually working on a handbook right now, and Judith, you may not know this, but when I first proposed it, it's through Sage. I wanted to call it it's a Sage handbook of mixed of just mixed research, and I wanted to dump the methods. And the problem is that I don't think you would find it, without. But I actually have to admit, I didn't come up with the word logic, even though I talk a lot about logic, and I'm in my description of design. And I see design as being not just the planning, but the design is the logic and procedures of what you do in mixed methods. And the challenge, of course, is shifting this. We don't actually have a consensus in the field of a definition of mixed methods. And maybe we'll get there, but maybe we won't. Maybe that's part of the embracing of different ways of being and knowing. But I think you have hit the nail on the head exactly with the challenge with terminology. And so thank you for raising that.
So we have to rename our series, and I have to rename a book chapter. There's some more work. Federica, please.
Yeah, maybe quickly to follow up on Sophia's point. I am a bit worried that if you try to switch to logic, people will quickly fall in the trap of believing that, that the word logic has a very formal and strict meaning, and then that you can kind of pin down the logic of scientific method, and then go another reductionistic view instead of taking this as the anti-reductionistic view that you were trying to describe in your approach to teaching. Because what I also find interesting to discuss with my students in the philosophy of social science course that come from the social sciences and they want to reflect upon their methods is that ultimately they have to be able to debunk the dichotomies, the qualitative versus the quantitative. One is good, the other is bad. The other is fluffy, the other is rigid. The one doesn't need any qualitative because it is rigorous, and the qualitative doesn't need rigor and numbers. No, so I'm sorry, because I'm totally unable to offer something constructive in terms of the labeling that may help there. And this frustrates me because I don't like to point at problems with no solutions. But I just wanted to bring up the question that there is really a deep question of how we conceive of methods in general. And I wish we could discuss more of how one makes use of the other in a constant way, even if very implicitly and not in a very visible way. So that's why I was loving the exercise of Judith in going through this very, very detailed analysis of the study. But yeah, my 2 cents again. Thank you.
Thank you, Federica. And I think your point about those dichotomies, resonates very strongly in this group, I can tell. I was also thinking, yeah, it's the trap we keep walking in. It's a heuristic, right? It works in communication, but in reality, we know it's much more complicated than just this simple, either this or that, this good, this is not good. Yeah, thank you so much. Any other questions to our panelists today? Ting, please.
Yeah, just follow up Federic's. So yeah, if there's like not the quantitative is not better than the qualitative, but I'm still a student. Before I studied sociology, but there's a very strong focus on data, numbers, and I wasn't so interested. So am I, as a student, still allowed to just follow my interests and say like, oh, that is not my thing. It's not like I don't think it's great, but just like, I don't want to know more about it. And how would you, because I joined this seminar as I still wanted to know more about this number side. So how would you view like sort of my kind of this sort of mismatch between my interests, like what I want and what I think I need?
It's a very great question indeed. Judith, please.
Well, perhaps I could say one thing, because I will give a presentation the beginning of July with a kind of provocative title, why qualitative research does not reveal the process behind a quantitative effect. And that's provocative because yes, qualitative research can do it, but the point is the role. What is the role of quantitative research in mixed methods? And if you then also look at my example, then that role is basically not so much in what is traditionally called the role of quantitative, namely showing whether there is an effect or not, but it's rather in the end it's the grouping that is interesting, and for which you need, so to speak, these quantitative data. And basically, in the end, with that study that I presented, the first claim was providing textbook does not have an effect in Kenya. But in the end, that claim is not valid anymore, because providing textbooks still has an effect, but there is a moderating factor to that, namely that children have to be able to read their textbooks. So I think in mixed method research, we should think differently about what exactly the role is of this quantitative data. And then I think the combination becomes very interesting, because exactly this kind of grouping and finding moderating effects is much more difficult, I think, with only qualitative data, but it can be done to have quantitative data on your participants or the persons that you interviewed.
Well, when's your where can I find your seminar? I'd be interested to be provoked.
Okay, well, you can if you send me an email, then I can send you the link.
Wait, do I have your email?
No, it's but you can find it if you type in my name then at University of Vienna. So I can also put it in the chat.
Good idea. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you so much, Judith. That's very kind of you. Cheryl, any thoughts from your side?
Well, I think about in society how we use data these days. And I think about even the way that my partner and I decide what movie to see. He goes after still the Rotten Tomatoes rating, and he almost lives by it. You know, where I'm much more likely to listen to other folks who I think I have something in common with and about what they think about. You know, so I think we're always going to have these preferences. I think that's a natural way of being in this world. But that we have found that there's some really good movies that don't have very good ratings by critics and by reviewers, but yet we got to because of somebody's recommendation. Or there can be lots of reasons why data doesn't exist quantitatively for a particular field. There can be lots of low incidence populations that have not been studied because we haven't been able to gather the types of data around their experiences yet. So I've also seen great studies that could not have happened without some sort of mixing and accessing different, different data sources. And I know I've worked with our statistics, federal, like Statistics Canada, around looking at what some of our limitations are when we only gather quantitative information, and we use quantitative information to make societal choices where we put our money in programs. That we might be only, hitting particular populations that are of a particular size. And of course, here in Canada, we have lots of populations where there isn't a lot of people in different places. How do we serve those folks if we're only making decisions based on quantitative data and trends and patterns that we're seeing? So I think there really is just you have to think about the research context. And I think if we come back to the research context, the conditions and what we need to know, I think that really guides us in terms of, so when you talk about, it's great that you become an expert in one area, but I think we have a responsibility to have some level of methodological awareness so that we can appreciate that different conditions may need different types of data. If we don't, then I think we risk perpetuating perhaps some of the limitations in our society today. But I am not a fan of that everybody has to know everything, because that's absolutely impossible.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same, because singular methods also keep developing, and the knowledge you need now to do, I don't know, intelligent statistical analysis is simply, it requires more skills and requires more knowledge than it may have been 40 years ago or thereabout. And the same goes for other forms of research. So it's a moving target. I believe we want to have more knowledge of what happens in other places. I was always going to say in other techniques, but in other places. Let's put it that way. But at the same time, it's super hard to keep up, and I think harder than ever before. And even I can speak from my own experience, trying to keep up with just QCA, which is one of the hobbies that I do. It's just very difficult because there's innovation every month. So, and that's only one little niche within this entire spectrum of research methods.
Yeah, Lasse, could I still add one comment? Because
yes, please.
What's so interesting about the study that I presented is that one of the authors, Michael Kramer, was he won the Nobel Prize for economics, and the reason why he won that, and you could read also these reports, was that he and a colleague of his, they had the courage, so to speak, to do randomized controlled trials in education, and especially also then in developing countries. And the study that I presented is one of those studies, because there was a randomized controlled trial with 50 schools without textbooks and 50 schools with textbooks. But the interesting conclusions happened not because of this randomized controlled trial, but because the mixed methods that he used, and the reviewers most likely didn't even notice that it was actually a mix. Of course, this was not the only study, but I can imagine that they perhaps didn't notice that in fact there are some of his studies were mixed method studies instead of purely randomized controlled trials, and that's very interesting.
Absolutely, it is. Yes, most certainly. Yeah. All right. Any last questions from the audience? If not, then I would give a heartfelt thanks for both panelists today, Judith, Cheryl. It was absolutely wonderful that you were here, especially knowing that Cheryl had to get up really early to be here. Thank you so much. That's dedication to the academic community. Thank you all. This is the non-scripted part where I'm going to say thanks to everyone who has been to our seminar series for the past months. It's been an absolute joy and delight to have to have met you all here. We originally had a difference, had made a distinction between the organizers, the panelists, and the audience. In reality, we were all contributing to the topics, and that was absolutely wonderful, very inspiring indeed. And if you wish, we still have the entire series on YouTube, and you can rewatch it if you want. Those were words from my side. I'm looking at Sophia and Federica. Maybe you want to say a few things from your side as organizers / occasional presenters / audience.
Just many thanks to everyone, as you said, the panelists, the audience, the organizers, because I really enjoyed this. Has been really enriching and inspiring every single time. So I'm very pleased with how it went.
Thank you so much, Federica. Then I will say goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and maybe, just maybe, there will be another series, but let's see. We will announce it through our normal channels. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.